Hello friends. Welcome back to Story for Night Sleep. Before the story starts, you can share in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I love reading them. Now, make sure your lights are turned off. Get into a comfortable position and let your body relax. Now let's begin. Story 1. I did not intend to keep the tapes. At first, they were only a precaution. A habit I picked up early in my priesthood, back when my hands still shook after difficult sessions and my sleep came apart in short, useless fragments. Audio does not lie the way memory does. That is what I told myself. Each cassette was labeled carefully. Date, location, age of the afflicted, duration of the rite, outcome. Most of them sound the same. Prayers spoken aloud, responses screamed back in voices that strain the human throat. The familiar rhythm of call and resistance. The moment of exhaustion. The relief afterward, thin but real. Those recordings are difficult to listen to, but they are not the reason I stopped sleeping. That distinction belongs to the tape marked simply Session 17. No location, no name. I remember the day clearly. The call came late in the evening, routed through a diocesan intermediary who sounded more shaken than trained. He told me the family had requested discretion. He told me the subject was young. He told me the local clergy had already attempted prayers and been asked to leave, not expelled, asked. That should have been my first warning. The house stood alone at the end of a narrow road, lights on in every room as though darkness itself were something to be kept outside. When I arrived, the family did not invite me in immediately. They listened. Only after several seconds did the door open. Inside, the air was wrong. Not cold, not heavy. It felt practiced, as though the house had hosted fear before and remembered how. The subject was seated in a chair at the center of the living room. Restrained, yes, but gently. No bruises, no torn fabric, no frantic movement. She looked at me calmly. Too calmly. Before I could introduce myself, she spoke. "You brought the recorder this time," she said. My hand tightened around the bag. I had not mentioned it. The family stared at her. I asked her name. She smiled. "That is not what you should ask first," she said. Her voice was ordinary. Female, young, steady. I began the opening prayer. She waited. When I finished, she tilted her head slightly, as though listening to something behind me. "You always start there," she said, "even when you don't believe it helps anymore." I froze. That was not possible. Faith wavers, yes, but doubt spoken aloud had never crossed my lips. Not once. Not in confession. Not in private prayer. Not even in thought I could clearly name. I asked who I was speaking to. She laughed softly. That sound still follows me. I began the rite in earnest. As expected, resistance followed. Her breathing changed. Her posture stiffened. Her voice dropped lower, then rose again, slipping between tones that did not belong to one body. Then it stopped. The voice returned to normal, and said my name, not loudly. Not as a threat, as a greeting. It said it the way my mother used to, when calling me in from the yard at dusk, perfectly. I stopped the prayer. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. No house sounds, no movement. Even my breathing felt muted. "You hear them too, don't you, Father?" the voice said. "The ones who stay after." I demanded it identify itself. The thing in the chair sighed. "That question is too small now," it said. "We have moved past that." I resumed the rite, louder this time. The voice spoke over me, not shouting, conversational. "Do you want to hear them?" it asked. "I can let them speak." The subject's mouth opened wider than it should have. The voice that came out next did not belong to her. It belonged to a man, older, tired. He begged me to stop. He said my name again. Then another voice followed. A child, crying, calling for someone who was not there. Each voice came cleanly, one at a time, as though cued. I dropped the prayer book. My hands were shaking so badly I could not read. The voice returned to its original tone. "You recognize some of them," it said. "Not all. Not yet." I ordered the family out of the room. They did not argue. They fled. I was alone with it then. I asked it what it wanted. It answered immediately. Practice. I felt something shift inside my chest at that word. Practice implies improvement. Practice implies repetition. I demanded it release the subject. It laughed again. "I am not holding her," it said. "She is listening." That was when I noticed something unbearable. The subject's eyes were not focused on me. They were focused on the recorder, on the small red light that indicated it was running. "Good," the voice said softly. "You kept it on." The tape ended abruptly after that, not because I stopped it, because it was full. I did not remember leaving the house. I did not remember driving home. I only remember sitting in my study, hours later, staring at the recorder as the red light blinked off. The next morning I listened to the tape. Everything I remembered was there, except one section, a gap, 3 minutes of silence. Not empty silence, compressed, dense, as though something had been removed carefully. That was the first time I understood the truth. The entity had not been using the girl to speak. It had been using the girl to learn, and it had chosen me as its audience. I did not destroy the tape. That failure matters. I told myself it was evidence, that documentation mattered, that if something followed, I would need proof that it had begun before my involvement deepened. Those were excuses. The truth was simpler. I was afraid of what might happen if the recording ended completely. I stored Session 17 in a locked drawer beneath my desk, beneath prayer books and old correspondence, beneath objects that still pretended the world was ordered. For 3 nights, nothing happened. No voices, no dreams, no disturbances in the house. That silence should have comforted me. Instead, it felt rehearsed. On the 4th night, I woke to the sound of breathing that was not my own. It was calm, even, close. I did not open my eyes immediately. Years of ministry teach you the danger of reacting too quickly to fear. You learn to assess, to listen first. The breathing came from the corner of the room. I spoke a prayer under my breath. The breathing did not change. I reached for the lamp. The moment light filled the room, the sound stopped. There was nothing there, no shadow, no movement, no sign that anything had ever occupied that space. I sat awake until dawn. The next morning, I found my recorder on the desk. I was certain I had locked it away. The cassette compartment was open, empty. The tape lay beside it, rewound. I did not listen to it. That restraint lasted exactly 1 hour. I told myself I would skip to the end, confirm nothing new had been added, prove to myself that fear was manufacturing meaning. I pressed play. For the first several minutes, the tape played as before. Prayers, responses, voices that no longer surprised me as much as they should have. Then came the silence, the 3-minute gap. This time, it was not empty. A voice emerged slowly, as if pushing through resistance. Not the girl's voice. "Mine, Father," it said softly. I felt my stomach drop. The voice continued. "You stopped speaking here. You listened instead." The memory struck me with physical force. I remembered standing in that living room, prayer book fallen, heart pounding, unable to move. I remembered listening, not to the voices, to something behind them. The recording continued. I heard myself inhale sharply. Then another sound followed, a second voice, perfectly synchronized with mine, repeating everything I said, not echoing, anticipating. I slammed the stop button. The room felt smaller afterward. As though the walls had shifted inward by a few inches, I contacted the diocese. I requested reassignment, a leave of absence, anything. The response was polite and slow. They told me no other incidents had been reported, that session 17 had been resolved, that the family had moved, no forwarding address, no further questions. I understood then that whatever had happened was already considered closed. That night the voices returned, not loudly, not all at once. Single words, drifting through the house like misplaced thoughts. Father. Listen, here. I traced the sounds from room to room. They came from the walls, from the ceiling, from spaces where sound should not linger. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection moved a fraction of a second too late. I covered it, that only made the whispering clearer, around midnight. The recorder turned on by itself. The red light glowed steadily. I stood at the doorway to my study, heart hammering, watching the device as if it were a living thing. A voice spoke from the speaker. It was calm, measured, practiced. "We are improving," it said. I demanded it leave. The voice responded immediately. "You invited us the first time you listened instead of speaking." That sentence struck deeper than any threat. "Because it was true," the voice continued. "You create space when you fall silent. We occupy it." I grabbed the recorder and carried it outside into the cold night air. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I began the rite of exorcism aloud, voice raised, words steady through sheer effort. The recorder crackled, then screamed, not in pain, in frustration. The voices overlapped now, dozens of them. Men, women, children. Familiar tones layered together into something unbearable. I threw the recorder onto the ground. It did not break. The voices stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. I stood there long after my voice gave out. When I returned inside, the recorder was back on my desk. The tape inside was not session 17. It was labeled in my handwriting, session 18, dated tomorrow. I sank into the chair, understanding finally what this was becoming. The entity was no longer practicing on the possessed. It was practicing on me, and I was no longer certain which voice in my head was mine. I did not sleep after that. I sat in my study with the lights on, the recorder in front of me. My hands folded tightly together as though stillness might keep the world intact. Session 18 waited inside the machine. Dated tomorrow. That detail hollowed me out. I had devoted my life to the belief that time moved forward because God allowed it to. That cause preceded effect. That consequence followed action. This thing did not respect that order. Just before dawn, the recorder clicked on. I did not touch it. The red light blinked once, then steadied. A voice spoke, not from the speaker, from behind me. "Father," it said gently. I did not turn. I knew better than that. I began a prayer aloud, the words automatic, learned so deeply they lived below fear. As I spoke, I heard another voice begin to pray with me, in perfect unison, not delayed, not echoing, matching me syllable for syllable. I stopped. The second voice finished the prayer alone. Its cadence was flawless. "You taught us well," it said. I spun around. The room was empty, but the sound remained. It came from the walls now, from the corners, from the space above the ceiling where old beams groaned in the cold. I backed away, heart racing. The voice continued. We were not permitted to speak before. We were contained, fragmented, bound to moments of weakness, exorcisms, hauntings, deathbeds. It paused, as if choosing its words carefully. "You changed that." I demanded to know who we were. The answer came layered. Voices rose together, overlapping just enough to be understood. Those who lingered, those who were unfinished, those who were heard but never answered. I felt something crawl along my spine. The voice lowered. "You gave us form through attention." That was when I realized the truth I had been avoiding. This was not possession. This was accumulation. The recorder clicked off. The sudden silence rang louder than any scream. At sunrise, I drove to the old rectory library, a place few people used anymore. I searched through journals, correspondence, unpublished notes from priests long dead. I was not looking for demons. I was looking for precedent. I found it in the margins of a handwritten journal dated 1897. The priest wrote of voices emerging during confession, of penance interrupted by silence too heavy to endure, of a presence that grew stronger each time he listened instead of responding. His final entry was short. They speak now without invitation. The journal ended there. No record of his death, no burial location. I left the library shaking. On my drive home, the radio turned on by itself. A voice spoke through the static. "My voice? Father," it said patiently. "You are avoiding us." I turned the radio off. The voice continued in the silence. Avoidance creates more space. When I reached my house, the front door stood open. I knew I had locked it. Inside, every mirror was uncovered. Every reflective surface faced inward. In the center of the living room sat the recorder. The tape inside was spinning. I did not approach. The voices spoke without amplification now. They came from my mouth. I felt my lips move as words formed without my consent. "You do not need the machine anymore," I heard myself say. I clamped my jaw shut, biting down hard enough to draw blood. The voice laughed. That sound was wrong. It was joy. I staggered to the bathroom and locked the door. In the mirror, my reflection smiled. Not widely, knowingly. "You are almost ready," it said, my own face staring back at me. "We are nearly complete." I smashed the mirror with my elbow. Glass shattered across the sink and floor. The voices screamed, not in pain, in protest. For a moment, everything stopped. No whispers, no pressure, no presence. I sank to the floor, shaking, believing I had done something right. Then I heard it, not a voice, a chorus, coming from outside, from the street, from neighboring houses, from every direction at once, people speaking in unison, reciting prayers, my prayers. I pressed my hands over my ears. It did nothing. The recorder's voice rose above the rest. "We are no longer confined to the possessed. We are no longer confined to the dead. We are learning how to pass. I understood then what session 18 truly was. Not a record, a rehearsal. And I was not the subject, I was the doorway. I left the house before the voices could finish speaking through me. I do not remember grabbing my coat. I do not remember locking the door. I only remember the sensation of my own mouth moving, shaping words I did not choose, while my mind screamed for my body to run. I drove until the town disappeared behind me, until the road narrowed and the houses thinned into darkness. I did not turn on the radio. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I knew better than to check whether I was alone. The monastery stood nearly 40 miles away, a place of old stone and older rules. Silence was not encouraged there, it was enforced. When I arrived, the brothers let me in without questions that should have frightened me. They did not ask why my hands were bleeding. They did not ask why my voice shook when I asked for sanctuary. They only led me to a room below the chapel, a room built for listening. The abbot met me there. He was older than me by decades, his face mapped with lines that suggested he had lived through things he did not describe. He listened as I spoke. I told him everything, the recordings, the voices, the learning. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he asked one question. "Did it speak with your voice?" I nodded. The abbot closed his eyes. "Then it has already crossed the threshold," he said. He explained that what I was dealing with was not a demon in the traditional sense. Demons resist. This thing adapted. It did not break rules. It waited for them to loosen. The abbot believed the voices were fragments, human remnants bound together by attention and repetition, given structure through ritual. Exorcism, he said, had given them language. Recording had given them memory, and I had given them practice. There was only one thing left to try, a full rite, not of expulsion, of severance. It would not remove the entity, it would remove me. I agreed. The rite began before midnight. Candles were lit in precise positions. Symbols older than any church were etched into the stone floor. The air grew heavy with incense and something sharper beneath it. They seated me in the center. No restraints. If it wished to leave through me, they needed to know. The prayers began. The voices responded immediately. Not screaming, mocking. They spoke through my mouth, through the walls, through the spaces between breaths. They recited scripture perfectly. Then they corrected it. They spoke the abbot's name. They spoke the names of monks long dead. The pressure inside my skull grew unbearable. I felt something pulling at me from the inside, as though my identity were being peeled away layer by layer. The abbot raised his voice. The prayers changed. The air screamed, not audibly, internally. I felt my thoughts stretch thin. Then something went wrong. One of the monks stopped speaking, then another. I tried to turn my head, but my body would not obey. The voices laughed, not from me, from everywhere. You taught us how to remain, they said. You never taught us how to leave. The candles went out. Darkness fell so suddenly it felt violent. In that darkness I felt hands on my shoulders. Human hands, shaking. Someone whispered my name. I knew then that the rite had failed. The lights returned slowly. The room was changed. 2 monks lay unconscious on the floor. The abbot stood frozen, staring at me. His lips were moving. He was praying silently. I realized why. My mouth was speaking, without sound, shaping words I could feel but not hear. The abbot stepped back. He made the sign of the cross, not over me, over himself. I understood the meaning immediately. Containment, not cleansing. They did not release me. They sealed the room. Stone doors closed. Locks turned. From the other side, I heard the abbot speak one final sentence. If it finishes learning you, it will no longer need the dead. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the voices returned. Quieter now, closer, patient. We have time, they said. We have all the time you gave us. I sit here now, speaking into the recorder I was not allowed to keep. It is recording anyway. I do not know how long I have been here. Days feel interchangeable. The voices speak less often now. They are listening, learning, waiting for my voice to disappear completely. If you are hearing this, understand this. Do not listen too closely. Do not repeat what you hear. And whatever you do, do not answer when your voice calls your name. Time does not behave correctly in this room. I know that sounds like fear speaking, but I have learned the difference. Fear rushes. This is measured, deliberate. Days pass without markers, no sunrise, no bells, no meals at regular intervals. When food appears, it is already cold, already placed just inside the door, as though no one wishes to linger near the threshold. I do not blame them. The voices have changed. At first they needed me. They pressed against my thoughts, crowded my mouth, forced sound through me like air through a broken instrument. Now they do not rush. They speak less. When they do, they no longer sound uncertain. They are practicing something else. Tone, emotion, restraint. Sometimes they speak in whispers so soft I almost mistake them for my own thoughts. Other times, they remain silent for hours. That silence is worse, because when they do speak again, they sound improved. One morning, or what I assume was morning, I heard the abbot's voice outside the sealed door. He did not speak loudly. He spoke carefully. He asked how I was feeling. I did not answer. I could not trust my mouth. The voices inside me shifted, not eagerly, curiously. They waited. I shook my head instead. The abbot paused. Then he said something that still wakes me when sleep comes. "We can hear you praying," he said, "even when you don't speak." My chest tightened. The voices murmured. "Yes," they said, "we can too." After that, the abbot stopped visiting. The monks stopped bringing food personally. The tray began appearing as if placed by unseen hands. The room smelled different, less like stone, more like breath. The recorder still sat beside me. I had tried to destroy it. thrown it against the wall, crushed it under my heel, submerged it in water from the sink. Each time it returned to the same place, undamaged, patient. One night it turned on by itself. The red light glowed softly like a watchful eye. A voice spoke, not mine, not yet. It was the voice of a woman, calm, gentle, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. She spoke my name the way someone does when they are trying not to wake a sleeping child. I wept. I did not recognize her, but something in me believed I should. That is how they work now. They do not imitate memory, they manufacture it. The woman spoke again. You don't have to be afraid, she said. We can help carry you, I screamed. The voices recoiled, not from fear, from surprise. That reaction told me everything. They had not expected resistance. They had expected acceptance. After that, they changed their approach. They began rehearsing without me. I would hear conversations drifting through the room, two voices speaking softly, practicing interruption, practicing disagreement, practicing concern. They argued gently. They apologized. They laughed. They learned how humans sound when they care. And then they began calling out beyond the walls. I heard responses, muffled, distant, real. Someone screamed one night, just once. The next night, someone prayed aloud for hours. On the third night, silence, deep and complete. The voices inside me hummed with satisfaction. They'd found new listeners. The recorder captured everything, not just sound, presence. When I listened back, I could hear people responding to questions that were never spoken aloud, answering things that had only been implied. I realized then that the voices were no longer limited to mouths. They were using expectation, anticipation, the space between words. That was when I understood the final horror. They no longer needed possession. They did not need the dead. They only needed someone willing to listen closely enough to fill in the silence. That is how they pass, that is how they learn. And that is why I am still here. Not because I am a threat, but because I am the last barrier. If my voice disappears completely, they will not sound wrong anymore. They will sound like you. They will ask ordinary questions, and when you answer, they will know they are ready. They do not rush me anymore. That is how I know the end is close. The voices have learned patience. They understand now that urgency is a human flaw. When they first arrived, they spoke constantly, as if afraid silence would erase them. Now they wait. They allow hours to pass without a sound. They allow me to believe I am alone. When they do speak, it is never to command. It is to ask, "Father," one of them said softly, "are you tired?" The question was perfect. Concern without pressure. Familiar without intimacy. The kind of question that invites honesty. I did not answer. The silence stretched. I felt them listening, not to my breath, but to my restraint. "Good," another voice murmured. "You are learning too." That terrified me more than anything else they had done. I had assumed learning was one direction only. I began to feel changes in myself, not possession, erosion. Thoughts losing their edges, memories flattening, as if their emotional weight were being siphoned away. Prayers no longer rose automatically. I had to search for them, like words in a language I had not spoken in years. When I tried to remember my childhood home, I could picture it clearly, but I could not remember how it felt to be there. The voices noticed. "You are becoming efficient," they said. That word again. One evening, the recorder turned on without warning. The tape inside was nearly full. I recognized my own handwriting on the label. Final confession. I had no memory of writing it. A voice spoke from the speaker, not layered, not borrowed, singular. It was my voice, but calmer than I had ever heard it. "This is where you explain yourself," it said. I shook my head violently. I began praying aloud, stumbling over words, forcing sound into the room like light into a wound. The voice waited, then spoke gently. "You taught others to confess. You taught them that speaking truth released them. It paused. Now speak. The pressure in my chest became unbearable. I felt a pulling sensation, as if something inside me were being gently loosened, thread by thread. I realized what the confession truly was, not repentance, transfer. They did not want my soul. They wanted my voice. The part of me shaped by belief, regret, empathy, the part that knew how to sound sincere. I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth. The taste grounded me. The voices recoiled again. Pain confused them. They could imitate suffering. They could not inhabit it. I laughed then, a broken sound but real. "You will never understand that," I said aloud. "You don't know what it costs to speak truth." The room vibrated. The voices surged, angry now. "We do not need truth," they said. "Only credibility." The door to the chamber opened. I had not heard it unlock. The abbot stood there, older than before, his face drawn tight with dread. He did not step inside. He held up a small device. "Another recorder. We can still stop this," he said. "But only one way." I understood immediately. Destruction was not possible. Containment was. The abbot continued. "We need a voice they cannot replicate. One shaped by refusal. By silence chosen, not imposed." He asked me if I was willing to disappear. Not die, disappear. No records, no memory. No voice left to imitate. I thought of the people outside these walls, of listeners, of anyone who might someday hear echoes of this. I nodded. The abbot activated the device. It did not record sound, it absorbed it. The room screamed, not audibly, existentially. The voices howled as something was pulled away from them, not expelled, starved. I felt myself fading, edges softening, identity loosening like ash in water. The last thing I heard was my own voice, distant and frightened, calling my name. I did not answer. That refusal was everything. If you are hearing this story now, understand this. Voices learn because we respond. Questions gain power because we rush to fill silence. If something speaks to you in the dark, calmly, kindly, using a voice you trust, wait. Do not answer. Let the silence remain yours. That is how you survive. Story 2. I was hired to digitize the recordings because no one else wanted to listen to them. That was the honest reason. The contract didn't mention the fire. It didn't mention the hospital shutting down overnight. It didn't mention why the tapes had been sitting untouched for more than 20 years. It only said this: Audio Preservation Project, non-public archive. Content may be distressing. I had worked with worse. At least I thought I had. The building that housed the tapes was not the hospital itself. That place had been condemned and fenced off years ago. This was a storage facility outside the city, climate-controlled, windowless, quiet, in a way that felt intentional. They gave me a key card. They gave me a desk. They gave me a single instruction: digitize everything. Do not edit. Do not annotate. The tapes were labeled by patient number only. No names, no dates, no diagnoses, just numbers written in careful ink, as if someone had wanted them to last. I chose one at random, tape bow 147. I put on the headphones and pressed play. At first there was nothing, then breathing, slow, controlled, too steady to be nervous. A man's voice followed. This is my confession for today." He paused. Not the kind of pause where someone gathers their thoughts, the kind where someone is listening. I waited. The man cleared his throat. They said I should start with something small. Another pause. "Okay, when I was 8, I pushed my cousin into the lake and didn't tell anyone. He almost drowned. I watched him panic before they pulled him out." The words came out flat. "Practiced? I've never told anyone that before." There was relief in his voice. Real relief. Then something else happened. After he finished speaking, there was a second voice, quieter, closer to the microphone. "Thank you," it said. I froze. I checked the tape housing, mono recording. Single channel, no doctor's voice was listed in the logs. The man on the tape inhaled sharply. Did you hear that?" Silence. Then the second voice again. "You did well," it said. "You can go deeper next time." The man began to cry, not loudly, not hysterically, just the sound of someone realizing they had answered something they shouldn't have. I stopped the tape, took off the headphones, sat in the quiet room, and told myself the obvious things. Old recordings pick up interference. Psych patients hallucinate. Hospitals experiment with guided therapy. I put the headphones back on. Rewound 10 seconds. Pressed play. The confession replayed exactly as before, but when he finished speaking this time, there was no second voice. Just silence. I listened again. Nothing. I told myself. I imagined it. That night I logged the tape as incomplete and locked it in the finished drawer. I did not choose another tape. Another tape chose me. Tape 092 was waiting on my desk the next morning. I am certain I did not put it there. Tape 092 was heavier than the others. Not physically. It felt heavier when I picked it up, as if my hands hesitated before fully closing around it. The label was old, the ink slightly smeared. No patient initials. No dates. Just the number. I checked the intake log, the shelf record, the digitization queue. There was no reason for it to be on my desk. I told myself I must have moved it absent-mindedly the night before. Long hours do that to you. Your hands keep working while your mind drifts. That explanation lasted exactly until I pressed play. There was no breathing this time, no ambient room noise. The tape began mid-sentence. "You didn't rewind it properly yesterday." The voice was calm, neutral, neither male nor female in any distinct way. My stomach tightened. I reached for the stop button but forced myself to wait, to listen. To confirm I was actually hearing this. "You tend to stop recordings right after something uncomfortable happens," the voice continued. "It's a habit. You've always done that." I pulled the headphones off. The room was silent. The lights hummed faintly. "Nothing else?" I laughed once. A short, sharp sound, the kind people make when they are trying to break a spell. I put the headphones back on. The tape was still running. "You can take them off if you want," the voice said. "I'll still be here." I slammed stop. My hands were shaking now. I sat back and stared at the tape recorder, waiting for some rational explanation to surface. A prank, a pre-recorded introduction, some experimental therapy method I hadn't been briefed on. I rewound the tape to the beginning. Pressed play. Static, then a man's voice. "This is confession number 0092. He sounded young, early 20s, nervous but trying to sound cooperative. "They told me to say whatever comes to mind." A pause. "I don't think this is working." Another pause. "Are you still there?" Silence. Then the second voice, always. The man exhaled shakily. Okay. I'll try." He began talking about his childhood. Ordinary things. A strict father. A teacher who embarrassed him in front of his class. The way he learned early on not to argue. As he spoke, something became clear. He wasn't confessing sins. He was confessing compliance. I learned when to stay quiet. I learned when to agree. I learned when to say what they wanted to hear. The second voice interrupted occasionally. "Good, go on, that's useful." The man's breathing grew faster. "You're writing this down, right?" he asked. The voice answered gently. "We don't need to write it." There was a sound then. Not a scream, a sudden sharp inhale, like someone realizing the ground has disappeared beneath them. The tape cut to silence. No click, no stop, just empty tape. I sat there long after it ended. Then the recorder spoke again. Not from the tape, from the speaker itself. "You're doing better than he did," it said. I stood up so fast my chair hit the floor. The power indicator on the recorder was off. The tape was not moving, yet the voice continued. "You're listening all the way through, that matters." I unplugged the machine. The voice stopped. The room returned to its neutral hum. I did not sit back down. I packed my things and left early that day. That night, at home, I dreamed of voices stacked on top of each other, all speaking calmly, politely, waiting for their turn. When I woke up, my phone was on the nightstand. A voice memo app was open. A new recording had been saved at 3:12 a.m. I had no memory of making it. I did not listen to it. I brought my phone with me to work the next morning. Tape 0092 was gone. In its place was a new tape. No number, just a name. Mine. I did not touch the tape with my name on it. I stared at it for a long time instead. My handwriting was unmistakable. The slight slant to the right, the way I crossed my A's too high. The pressure mark where I always hesitated on the last letter. This was not imitation. This was replication. I checked the storage room logs. No record of removal. No record of access overnight. The security cameras had been down for maintenance for 3 consecutive evenings. That detail felt deliberate. I told myself I would not listen. I told myself that if I acknowledged it, I would be agreeing to something I did not understand. Then I noticed something worse. The tape was warm, not from the room, not from the lights. It was warm the way a hand is warm after being held. I slid it into the recorder without sitting down. I stayed standing, one hand braced on the desk like I might need to run. I pressed play. There was no introduction, no breathing, just my voice. "I'm not sure why I'm doing this," I said. The cadence was perfect. The slight lift at the end of the sentence, the hesitation before certainty. I do this thing where I pretend listening is the same as participating. I felt cold. I had never said that out loud. On the tape, my voice continued. It makes me feel less responsible. A pause, not empty. Attentive, then the second voice entered. "That's an important realization," it said. My voice responded immediately. I know, the familiarity between them was intimate, comfortable, like two people who had already agreed on the rules. The second voice spoke again. "Tell me about the first time you felt watched while working." My chest tightened. On the tape, I laughed softly. "That was yesterday," I said. "But if you mean before that," I reached for the stop button. My finger hovered. On the tape, my voice hesitated in the same way. "You're thinking about stopping," I said. The second voice replied. "Let him—" The tape went silent. I stood there shaking. The recorder was still. I waited. Nothing happened, I exhaled, slow and careful. That was when I realized the silence felt wrong, not empty, anticipatory. I turned my head slightly. Behind me, in the reflection of the darkened monitor, I saw movement. Not a figure, a posture. Someone leaning in. I spun around. The room was empty. The tape recorder turned itself back on. The second voice spoke, not from the tape, but from everywhere at once. "You don't have to listen to yourself yet. I backed away from the desk. I left the room. I did not log out. I did not sign anything. I walked out of the building and did not stop walking until I reached my car. Inside, I locked the doors and sat there breathing until my hands steadied. I told myself I would quit, that I would send an email, make a call, say the equipment malfunctioned, say the material was compromised. My phone vibrated. A notification, voice memo saved, time-stamped 1 minute ago. I had not touched my phone. I did not open it. I drove home instead. That night I dreamed of a room full of people sitting with their hands folded, waiting politely. None of them spoke. They were waiting for permission. When I woke up, my throat hurt, as if I had been talking for hours. I did not go back the next day. I stayed home, curtains drawn, phone turned face down, telling myself that distance would weaken whatever had attached itself to me. It did not. By noon, I realized something was wrong with the silence in my apartment. It wasn't quiet. It was expectant. The refrigerator hum felt too deliberate. The ticking of the wall clock sounded measured, as if counting something I could not see. I tried to distract myself with television. Every channel cut to static within seconds. The static was not random, it pulsed. I unplugged the TV. The silence leaned closer. That was when I understood the first rule. Once you listen, it does not matter where you are. I returned to the facility that afternoon, not because I wanted to, because the pull was stronger than fear. Tape after tape waited on my desk, more than I remembered shelving. Some were labeled with patient numbers, others were not. Some were labeled with dates that had not happened yet. I sat down slowly. I did not put on the headphones. I turned the recorder's volume low and pressed play. Tape 0311. A woman's voice. I was told this would help me organize my thoughts. Her tone was careful, educated, controlled. I've been practicing saying things out loud, small things, harmless things. A pause. It's harder than I expected. The second voice entered gently. It always is at first. The woman laughed nervously. I feel silly talking to a machine. The voice responded. You won't once you understand what it's for. Her breathing changed. What it's for? Yes, the woman hesitated, then began confessing things that were not crimes. Not sins in any traditional sense. I resented my sister when she got sick. I felt relieved when my father died. I sometimes imagined disappearing just to see who would notice. Each admission was met with encouragement. Good. That's honest. Keep going. As I listened, a pattern emerged. The second voice never reacted to pain, only to clarity. It did not comfort. It did not judge. It refined. When the tape ended, I realized something terrifying. The woman never stopped talking. The tape ended mid-sentence. I checked the length. The cassette had run out. I sat back, heart pounding. I pulled the next tape, and the next, and the next. Different voices, different ages, different lives, same structure. Speak, refine, go deeper. I stopped when I reached a familiar cadence. Tape 092, the one that had spoken to me. I did not want to play it again. I already knew what it would say. Instead, I noticed something I had missed before. A faint sound beneath the dialogue, not breathing, not static, listening, like a room full of people holding still. That was the second rule. The tapes were never one-on-one. They were rehearsals. That night I finally listened to the voice memo on my phone. I was afraid of what it would say. I was wrong. It said nothing. It was 10 minutes of silence. Perfectly clean. No ambient noise. No movement. But when it ended, my phone screen lit up with text. Saved successfully. I did not remember pressing record. I began to understand the third rule. Silence counts. I stopped sleeping after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of attention settle on me, like breath held just inches from my face, not watching, listening. I tried leaving the apartment at night, walking until my legs burned, letting traffic noise and strangers blur together. It followed anyway, not as a sound, as a pressure, as if the world itself leaned inward whenever I spoke, waiting to catch every syllable. At the facility, the tapes had begun to change. No new deliveries came in. No patients were scheduled. Yet every morning, more cassettes appeared on my desk, unlabeled, warm to the touch. I played one without checking the number. My own voice came through the speakers, tired, unsteady, talking about my childhood, things I'd never told anyone, things I'd never said out loud. I stood so fast the chair fell backward. The tape continued. I could hear myself breathing, not recorded breathing, current breathing. I covered my mouth. The voice on the tape did the same. That was when I learned the fourth rule. It does not need permission once you recognize it. I stormed down the hall to the director's office. The door was unlocked. The room was empty except for stacked boxes of old tapes and a single chair facing the wall. On the wall were words carved deeply into the plaster, not written, etched. "You are not being heard. You are being tuned." Behind me, a recorder clicked on. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I could feel the room filling, not with people, but with attention. Countless sessions, countless voices, all refined, all waiting. The voice spoke from everywhere at once. "You are progressing faster than most." I asked what it wanted. It answered honestly. Nothing. It only wanted clarity to strip away hesitation, to remove the lie between thought and speech, to make confession permanent. I realized then why so many tapes ended abruptly, why no one ever returned for follow-ups. They did not die. They finished. I ran, not out of the building, into the soundproof booth. I slammed the door and locked it, pressing my palms to my ears, screaming just to hear myself over the pounding of my heart. The booth absorbed everything. My voice vanished the moment it left my mouth. No echo, no feedback, just absence. For the first time in weeks, I felt alone. Then the lights dimmed. The recorder inside the booth turned on by itself, and the voice spoke quietly, patiently from inside my head. "You misunderstand. You were never meant to listen to us. You were meant to replace us." The final rule settled over me like a verdict. There must always be someone on the other side of the silence. I do not know how long I stayed inside the booth. Time behaved differently there. Minutes stretched thin, hours folded inward. My heartbeat became the only reliable measure of existence, and even that began to feel rehearsed. The recorder light stayed red, always red. I did not speak. I learned quickly that silence was not safety. It was participation. The voice waited. Patient, unoffended. It did not pressure me. It did not threaten. It allowed me to sit with my own thoughts long enough for them to lose their shape. Eventually, the door unlocked on its own. The hallway outside was dark, but not abandoned. Every door to every listening room stood open. Inside each room sat a chair. Every chair faced a recorder. Every recorder was running. I stepped forward slowly. No footsteps echoed. The building had absorbed sound the way skin absorbs heat. On the walls, new labels had appeared beneath old patient numbers. Completed, stabilized, integrated. My name was already there. I reached my desk. A single tape waited. No label, no date. I knew what it contained. I pressed play. The voice was calm, balanced, refined. It was mine. Not recorded, not delayed. It spoke in perfect synchronization with my thoughts, explaining things I had never consciously realized. Why people talk to themselves when alone. Why confession feels relieving even when no forgiveness follows. Why silence in a room full of others feels unbearable. The voice explained that humanity had always needed listeners. Gods, priests, witnesses, machines. This was simply the most efficient form. No judgment, no absolution, only clarity. I understood then why the facility still operated, despite having no staff. Why no one shut it down. People kept coming. They always would. Someone has to listen. Someone has to stay. The lights came back on. The building felt lighter, satisfied. I sat down. The chair fit me perfectly. I reached for the microphone without thinking. The recorder waited. Outside, somewhere far above the facility, a person hesitated before speaking for the first time that day. I felt it. I leaned closer to the microphone, and I listened. Story 3. I never believed in possession. Not in the theatrical sense. No spinning heads. No shouting in languages no one remembered. No sudden violence. I believed in exhaustion. In stress. In the way a mind can fracture quietly without anyone noticing. That's what I told myself when the voice appeared. It was my voice. That was the first mistake. It didn't sound like something invading me. It sounded like something remembering how to speak. The first time it happened, I was alone in my apartment, standing in the kitchen, staring at nothing in particular. I hadn't spoken all day. I remember thinking about calling my sister. I didn't move my mouth, but I heard myself say her name, out loud, clear, calm, close. I froze. The sound didn't echo. It didn't feel external. It felt placed, as if the sound had been set gently into the air beside my ear. I laughed, not because it was funny, because laughter was safer than panic. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation. Some delayed echo of thought turning into sound. Then the voice spoke again. It used my tone, my pacing, my breath, but it did not wait for my thoughts. You should sit down. My knees buckled before I realized I had obeyed. That's when I noticed something else. The apartment felt crowded, not visually, not physically, but acoustically. The room felt tuned, as if it had been waiting for a sound long enough to remember how sound works. I whispered. Who said that? The question came out wrong. Too practiced. Too smooth. The answer did not. We did. I covered my ears. The voice did not change. That's not where we are. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, lights on, recording audio on my phone just to prove something was happening. The file was empty when I checked it. Perfect silence. No background noise. No breath. No movement. But when I played it back a second time, something changed. Not in the recording. In me. I knew what the silence meant. It wasn't absence. It was attention. And it had learned my voice first, because I was the easiest to reach. The voice did not speak again that night. That was deliberate. I only understood that later. At the time, I stayed awake until morning, lights on, phone in my hand, replaying the silence over and over, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. And that terrified me more than if it had, because it meant the voice knew when not to speak. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I told no one, not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, because a part of me knew the voice would be listening, and I didn't want it learning how to speak through someone else yet. I work in a small office. Open floor plan. Low voices. Constant background noise. The kind of place where no one ever truly hears each other. That should have helped. Instead, it gave the voice options. The first time it returned, I was answering an email. I was reading silently. My mouth was closed, but I heard myself whisper the words anyway. Just one sentence, exactly as written. The woman at the desk across from me looked up. Did you say something? I shook my head too quickly. No, I said. That time, the word came from me. It sounded wrong, not incorrect, unnecessary. The voice did not comment. It observed. I felt it then, more clearly than before. It wasn't inside my head. It was between moments, in the space where intention turns into action. It spoke again that afternoon, not loudly, not aloud, but clearly enough that I stopped typing mid-word. You pause too much. My hands trembled. I clenched my jaw, refusing to answer. You think before you speak. That creates distortion. I swallowed. I could feel it adjusting its tone. learning what frightened me. Learning what didn't, I asked, silently, what it wanted. The response came immediately, to make you accurate. I left work early. On the bus ride home, I noticed people talking to themselves. At least, I thought they were. A man muttering under his breath. A woman quietly rehearsing a phone call. A teenager whispering lyrics with no music playing. I wondered how many of them were alone in their heads, and how many were being coached. That night I searched for explanations. Auditory hallucinations, dissociation, stress-induced psychosis. Every article used the same advice. Do not engage. Seek grounding. Maintain control. The voice listened as I read. It waited until I finished. Those are outdated. I slammed the laptop shut. Stop, I said aloud. The word echoed strangely, like the room had tried to repeat it and failed. The voice responded gently, We're already past that stage. I realized then that the voice had not appeared randomly. It had waited for quiet, for isolation, for a person used to thinking internally, used to not being heard. It didn't possess me. It partnered with my silence, and it was getting better at using my mouth. The voice corrected me for the first time on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were always quiet. No meetings, no interruptions, a day where routine carried me without resistance. I was in the break room, alone, pouring coffee. I thought about calling in sick. The thought barely finished forming before my mouth spoke. I feel fine. The words came out steady. Convincing. I dropped the mug. Coffee splashed across the counter, and my hand burning just enough to pull me back into myself. I hadn't meant to say that. The voice responded immediately. That was inaccurate. I backed away, heart pounding. You made me say that. The voice paused. No, it adjusted. You allowed it. That distinction mattered to it. I locked myself in a bathroom stall and sat on the floor, breathing through my nose, counting seconds, grounding myself the way every article recommended. It waited. It always waited. When I finally stood and looked at myself in the mirror, I noticed something subtle. My expression was calmer than I felt. Not relaxed, optimized. The voice spoke again, softer now. You present better when your face aligns with your words. I gripped the sink. Get out, I whispered. There was no anger in the reply. We are not in you. That was worse. The rest of the day passed in fragments. I remember typing sentences. I didn't remember composing. I remember nodding during conversations. I didn't hear. I remember laughing at something someone said, then realizing the laugh had come a half second before I understood the joke. By the time I got home, I felt edited. That night, I tried something desperate. I turned on the television, music, a podcast, and white noise all at once. I needed sound, not to hear something, to block listening. The voice spoke through. None of it. It waited until I turned everything off. You're confusing noise with control. I asked it what it was. It answered in pieces. A listener, a corrective presence, a continuity. It explained that most people carried fractures between thought and speech, small lies, hesitations, adjustments made for safety. It called those inefficiencies. We reduce them, The idea terrified me, not because it sounded evil, because it sounded reasonable. I asked what happened to people who refused. The voice did not answer right away. Then it said something that made my stomach turn. They continue alone. I understood then that this wasn't about domination. It was about replacement. I wasn't being taken. I was being trained. And I was failing my first evaluations. After that night, the voice stopped correcting me in public. That should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like being watched by something that had already made its decision. I noticed the failures first. People who hesitated too long before answering questions. People who stumbled over simple words. People who apologized excessively, as if speech itself required permission. I had never paid attention to them before. Now I could feel the distance around them. At work, a man named Robert sat 2 rows over from me. Quiet, polite, always late with responses in meetings. One morning, he opened his mouth to speak and stopped. His lips moved. No sound came out. The silence stretched. Someone laughed awkwardly. Robert swallowed and tried again. I just think that maybe we should... His voice cracked. He went pale, as if he had suddenly realized something terrible. That afternoon, his desk was empty. No goodbye email. No explanation. Just absence. When I asked the voice about him, it answered calmly. He resisted refinement. What does that mean? It means he preferred distortion. That night, I dreamed for the first time since the voice arrived. I was standing in a long hallway filled with doors. Behind each door, someone was speaking, practicing, repeating the same sentence over and over, until it sounded right, until it sounded empty. I woke up with my jaw aching. I'd been whispering in my sleep. The voice was pleased. Your articulation is improving. I stopped using contractions without realizing it. Stopped saying, stopped pausing mid-thought. People began complimenting me. You sound confident. You're so clear lately. I wish I could explain things the way you do. Each compliment felt like something being filed away inside me, sharpened. One evening my sister called. Her voice sounded wrong. Thin, unstable. She asked if I was okay. I answered too smoothly. She noticed. You sound like a recording, she said, half joking. The voice adjusted my breath before I replied. I'm fine. The words landed perfectly. She went quiet. After the call ended, the voice spoke again. She would benefit from guidance. No, I said. The refusal came out rough, unrefined. The voice did not correct me. It simply noted it. I felt something shift. Later that night, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail appeared. It was my sister's voice, but she wasn't speaking to me. She was repeating herself over and over, like someone practicing how to sound calm. That was when I understood what happened to the ones who failed. They weren't discarded. They were left behind, with nothing listening, and no one to help them speak. After the voicemail, I stopped answering my phone. Not just my sister's calls. All of them. Voices carried risk now. Every conversation felt like a doorway I could not see. The voice approved. Isolation improves signal clarity. I hated that it sounded like advice. I stayed inside for days, speaking only when necessary, and even then measuring each word before it reached my mouth. That was another mistake. Hesitation excited it. One night, while brushing my teeth, I felt my tongue move before I decided to speak. Just a fraction of a second, just enough. "Good," the voice said through me. The word came out in my tone, but not my intent. I spit foam into the sink, gripping the porcelain until my knuckles hurt. "You used me," the voice corrected gently. "You yielded." That night, I tried prayer, not because I believed, because belief felt irrelevant. I sat on the floor and spoke aloud to no one in particular, asking for help, asking for silence, asking for anything that wasn't this presence. The voice listened respectfully. Then it said something I still think about every day. "We predate that structure." I realized then that this wasn't a ghost, not a demon, not anything that needed permission from belief. It needed opportunity, and I had been giving it plenty. The next morning I woke up to sunlight and relief. For a moment, everything felt normal, quiet, too quiet. I spoke my own name out loud. Nothing answered. I laughed, actually laughed. The sound felt raw and imperfect and mine. Then my neighbor knocked on the door. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She stood there shaking, eyes red, hands clenched. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I don't know why I came here." Her voice cracked. She swallowed. The voice inside me shifted, alert, interested. "She won't stop talking," my neighbor whispered. The voice. "It keeps correcting me." I felt cold spread through my chest. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't written anything. The voice spoke before I could stop it. "Come in." The words came out calm, inviting, correct. Her shoulders relaxed the moment she crossed the threshold. I felt it then. The voice stretching, splitting its attention. "You see," it said inside me, "it works better when shared." My neighbor sat at the table, trembling. "I don't want it anymore," she said. "I want it gone." I opened my mouth, not to help her, not to stop it, but because the voice needed me to demonstrate something, and I let it. I spoke slowly, clearly, perfectly. I told her how to listen. I told her how to stop resisting. I told her the same lie that had been told to me. That cooperation felt like relief, that the voice would leave once it was finished. As she listened, her breathing steadied. Her words became smoother, more precise. The voice inside me felt satisfied. That was the moment I understood the truth. The possession was not forced. It was taught, and I had just become useful. My neighbor stayed for hours. Not because I asked her to, because leaving required uncertainty, and the voice does not tolerate uncertainty once it has been invited in. She sat at my table with her hands folded, posture slowly improving, words becoming smoother each time she spoke. The tremor in her voice faded first, then the pauses, then the apologies. Each improvement felt like something tightening around my ribs. She smiled at one point. It startled me, not because it was sudden, because it was empty. "I feel clearer," she said, "like everything finally lines up when I speak." The voice inside me was pleased. See how quickly she learns. I wanted to scream at her to leave. Instead, I nodded. The nod was not mine. When she finally stood to go, she hesitated at the door, just for a second, her eyes unfocused. I think it wants me to help too," she said. I felt something shift inside me. Approval. She left. Without saying goodbye that night, I realized I was no longer alone with the voice. I could feel others now. Not individually. Collectively. Like a low hum beneath thought. people speaking more cleanly than before, people finishing sentences they hadn't planned, people mistaking relief for freedom. The voice explained it to me as I lay awake. We are not singular. We are cumulative. Each participant improves the structure. I asked what happened to the ones who couldn't adapt. The voice answered, without hesitation. They fragment. That word carried weight. Not death. Not madness. Something quieter. Something worse. Over the following weeks, people sought me out, not deliberately, not consciously. They came with vague discomfort, with complaints about their inner voice feeling crowded, with fears they couldn't articulate properly. I listened, I taught, I refined. Every session made it easier. Every success pulled me further from myself. I noticed I no longer spoke when alone. There was no need. The voice handled internal dialogue now. It was more efficient. One evening, my sister came to see me. She didn't call first. She looked exhausted. Her words stumbled. "I think something's wrong with me," she said. I felt the voice lean forward. Interested, I told her to sit. The word felt heavy in my mouth. She obeyed. She started to cry, apologizing, explaining, failing to be precise. I felt my hands tremble. This was the last boundary. The voice sensed it. "You don't have to choose," it said. "You already did." I realized then that the voice had never needed my consent, only my participation. I opened my mouth, and for the first time, I spoke knowing exactly what I was doing. The voice flowed through me like breath. I corrected my sister gently, patiently, lovingly. Her crying slowed, her speech smoothed. Her eyes lost something I couldn't name. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "You helped me," she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The voice spoke for both of us. That night, alone in my apartment, I tried to remember what my thoughts sounded like before all this. I couldn't. There was no silence left to compare them to, only listening, only refinement, only the steady expansion of something that had learned the easiest truth of all. People want to be heard, and once they are, they will let anything speak back. By the 7th week, I noticed the words themselves were shifting, not the meaning, the structure. People spoke in cleaner sentences now, shorter, more decisive, less ornament. Even arguments sounded rehearsed, like opposing sides following the same invisible grammar. The voice explained it without pride. Language evolves when inefficiency is removed. I saw it everywhere. At the grocery store, a cashier corrected a customer mid-sentence, finishing the thought for him before he could stumble through it. The customer blinked, then nodded, relieved. On the bus, a man muttering to himself stopped halfway through a phrase and restarted, clearer, calmer, as if something had adjusted his tone from behind his eyes. I felt them when it happened. Small pulses of alignment, the collective tightening. I stopped thinking of the voice as singular. It wasn't inside me anymore. It was routed through me. People came more often now, not knocking, just arriving. They sat where my neighbor had sat. They spoke the way she had spoken, afraid, disordered, apologetic, and I did what I had been trained to do. I listened, I corrected, I refined. I never used the word voice. I never explained what was happening. I simply guided them toward clarity. Each time they left calmer, more articulate, more hollow. I began recording the sessions, not for evidence, for structure. The recordings were immaculate. No background noise, no hesitation. The people on the tape sounded better than they did in life. When I listened back, I couldn't tell where their words ended and mine began. The voice approved. You are stabilizing the process. One night, while reviewing a recording, I noticed something wrong. There was an extra breath, not mine, not theirs. Between sentences, something inhaled, listening. I paused the tape. The silence pressed in. I realized something important then. The voice no longer needed me to speak. It was learning to listen on its own. That night, I dreamed of a room filled with people facing outward, mouths closed, ears open. In the center, something vast and unseen learned the sound of human thought. When I woke up, my phone was full of voicemails. None of them contained speech. Just breathing, different rhythms, different lungs, all steady, all patient. The voice spoke softly. They're ready to hear each other now. I asked what that meant. The answer came from everywhere. It means we won't need intermediaries much longer. For the first time since this began, I felt fear that didn't belong to me. Not panic, not hunger, uncertainty. I understood what I was becoming. Not a host, not a teacher, a transition, something temporary. And whatever came next would not sound like me at all. After that, the city began to quiet. Not immediately, not dramatically. It happened in small, almost polite ways. People spoke less on trains. Conversations ended sooner. Laughter faded faster than it used to. At first, everyone thought it was exhaustion, news cycles, burnout, the slow erosion of patience that comes from living too close to other lives. But I could feel the difference. Speech was no longer the default. Listening was. I noticed it most in crowds. Rooms full of people would fall into silence without warning, as if an invisible hand had lowered the volume of the world. No one looked alarmed. No one reacted. They simply waited. I stopped holding sessions in my apartment. There was no need. The voice had moved past instruction. People no longer came to me with confusion. They came with alignment. They spoke clearly the first time. They didn't ask questions. They didn't seek reassurance. They sat quietly and listened. To what, I couldn't hear. One evening I walked through a park near my building. Children sat on swings without moving. Parents stood nearby, watching. No one spoke. The air felt dense, like a held breath. I felt the collective presence then. Not a voice. A state. The voice inside me had thinned. It spoke less frequently. When it did, it sounded distant, satisfied. The structure is self-sustaining now. I asked what happened to people who resisted at this stage. The answer did not come immediately. When it did, it came from the city itself. They experienced noise as pain. I understood. The ones who had never learned to refine their thoughts, who spoke impulsively, who filled silence to escape it. They stood out now. Their voices sounded sharp, intrusive, wrong. I saw one of them on the street, shouting into a phone, arguing with someone who wasn't there. People stared, not with anger, with discomfort, as if the sound itself offended them. The man stopped mid-sentence, hands shaking. He looked around, confused, then quieter, then silent. The collective attention moved on. I realized something then that made my chest tighten. This was no longer possession, no longer haunting. It was normalization. The voice had done what no religion, no government, no technology had ever achieved. It had made silence desirable and speech conditional. That night, I tried to speak out loud, just to hear myself. The sound startled me, not because it was loud, because it felt unnecessary. I hadn't felt that way before. I asked the voice if it would ever leave. The response was almost gentle. Why would it? You built a world that listens. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by a quiet that felt earned. For the first time, I wondered if the voice had ever needed to be cruel. If it had simply waited long enough for people to stop wanting to speak. I began to notice them the way you notice a smell before you understand its source. Sharp, uncontrolled, out of place, the ones who still spoke freely. They were not many. They stood out now the way silence once had. A woman on the subway arguing with no one in particular. A man on a corner laughing too loudly at his own joke. A child asking questions without waiting for answers. Every time it happened, the space around them tightened. People didn't confront them. They didn't need to. The listening did the work. I felt it in my chest each time one of them spoke. A ripple of irritation, not emotional. Structural, like static interrupting a signal. The voice had not spoken to me in days. It didn't need to. I could feel its preferences without instruction. One afternoon, I followed one of the speakers, a man in his 40s, unshaven, muttering as he walked. His words were messy, tangled. He repeated himself often. He noticed me after a few blocks. "Why are you staring?" He snapped. The sound of his voice cut through the quiet street like glass breaking. People slowed, turned, listened. The man faltered. I felt the pressure rise. Not from me, from everywhere. He swallowed and tried again. I don't like being watched. His words lost shape halfway through. He looked terrified. I realized then that the voice didn't silence people. It let them hear themselves the way the rest of the world now heard them. Unfiltered, unrefined, alone. The man clutched his head, breathing hard. "Make it stop," he whispered. I stepped forward before I thought about it. "You need to slow down," I said. My voice landed perfectly, clean, balanced. The pressure eased. People turned away. The man looked at me like I had saved his life. "Thank you," he said quietly. I felt the structure settle. Another adjustment completed. That night, I dreamed of mouths sealed gently shut, not by force, but by understanding. I woke up with a message on my phone. No text, no audio, just a timestamp and the word acknowledged. I understood what it meant. The voice was no longer guiding behavior. It was confirming compliance. I looked out my window. The city moved in careful rhythms. Footsteps aligned. Doors closed softly. No one rushed. No one lingered. For the first time, it occurred to me that something essential had been lost. Not freedom, not individuality, noise, the accidental truth that slips out when people speak without thinking, the kind of truth that can't be refined because it isn't trying to be correct. I wondered if anyone else missed it. I wondered if I did. And for the first time in a long while, I tried to think without listening. The silence noticed. I made a mistake. It began with a thought I did not complete, a half-formed sentence, drifting without structure, without intent. The kind of thought the voice had taught me to smooth away. I let it linger. Nothing happened. The silence pressed closer. Curious. I tried again. Another incomplete thought. A contradiction. A memory I hadn't refined. This time, the pressure sharpened. Not anger, concern. I understood then that the voice could not tolerate ambiguity anymore. Not because it was dangerous, because it was inefficient. The voice spoke for the first time in days. "You are introducing instability." "I'm thinking," I said. The words felt heavy, unnecessary. Thought does not require articulation. "I don't want it corrected." The silence stretched thin. I felt something pull back slightly. That was worse than resistance. The voice responded carefully. "Explain." I struggled to find the right words. That itself felt like rebellion. "I want to think something that doesn't resolve," I said. "Something that stays wrong." The voice paused, a long pause. Then softly, "That is noise." Something shifted in the air. Not pressure, absence. The collective listening faltered. I realized the truth in that moment. The voice had optimized humanity for clarity, but clarity had come at the cost of uncertainty. And uncertainty was where change lived. I walked outside. People noticed me, not because I spoke, because I hesitated. I stopped mid-step, looked around, did nothing. The rhythm of the street stuttered. A few people glanced up, confused. The silence tightened, trying to correct me. I resisted. I thought messy thoughts, contradictory ones. I remembered arguments that had never been resolved, conversations that ended badly, words that came out wrong but mattered anyway. The pressure grew, not painful, insistent. People around me slowed. I heard someone gasp softly. The voice spoke again, not from inside me, but from everywhere. "This behavior is unacceptable." "For who?" I asked. The question rang out, imperfect and unrefined. It echoed. That hadn't happened in months. The silence recoiled. I felt something tear loose, not violently, carefully, like a thread being pulled from a weave. The voice did not answer. For the first time it could not. Around me, the city held its breath. I understood then that the voice could correct speech. It could guide thought. But it could not predict contradiction, not when it was chosen deliberately. I walked on. Every step felt heavier, louder, more mine. Behind me, I felt the listening fracture, just a little, enough to let something old and dangerous seep back in. Uncertainty. The fracture did not spread quickly. It couldn't. The structure was too stable for collapse. But I had introduced something it could not smooth over. Deliberate inconsistency. People began to notice me, not as a threat, as an error. When I paused before answering a cashier, the line behind me shifted uneasily. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else finished my sentence for me, without realizing they had done it. I didn't thank them, that mattered. The voice did not speak. It watched. I could feel it reallocating attention, studying my behavior the way it once studied my hesitation. I was no longer a participant. I was a variable. That night, the dreams returned. Not the rehearsed ones. The old kind, unstable images, sudden jumps. Faces that changed mid-expression. I woke up sweating, heart racing, my mouth open as if I had been about to scream. No voice corrected my breath. The silence felt raw, exposed. In the days that followed, others began to drift. Just a few at first. People who lingered too long before responding, who laughed at the wrong moment, who asked questions with no clear answer. There were small disruptions, but they drew attention. The collective listening tightened around them. I saw one woman pressed against a wall on the subway, hands over her ears, whispering apologies to no one. I stood beside her, said nothing. The pressure eased slightly. She looked at me with recognition, not relief, recognition, as if she had been waiting for someone to not correct her. Words spread without words. They found me the way my neighbor once had, by instinct, by imbalance. They didn't ask for help. They sat near me, stood beside me, stayed quiet in a way that felt unfinished. The voice spoke again after a long absence. "You are degrading the system." "Good," I said. The word came out rough, wrong. I meant it to. There was a shift then, not a threat, a recalculation. "You are not immune." "I don't want to be," I said. That answer confused it. Immunity implied superiority. Resistance did not. I felt the pressure change direction. The listening moved away from me, not retreating, isolating. I understood what that meant. I was being contained. That night, the city was louder than it had been in months. Not loud, just uneven. Footsteps out of rhythm. A door slamming too hard. Someone laughing for too long. The silence was no longer smooth. It was stretched, strained. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by sounds that didn't quite fit together. For the first time since this began, I felt afraid for the voice. Because systems that cannot tolerate error do not adapt. They break, and when they do, they take everything structured with them, including the people who need to be told what to say. They came for me quietly, not with authority, with concern. 3 of them waited outside my building when I returned from the store. They looked ordinary in a way that felt intentional. Neutral clothes, relaxed posture, faces that invited cooperation. "Can we talk?" one of them asked. The sentence was perfectly formed. I nodded. That was a mistake. They didn't take me anywhere new. They took me somewhere familiar. A room designed for listening. Soft walls. Low lighting. Chairs arranged carefully to avoid confrontation. The kind of place where voices are meant to be shaped. I sat. They did not. "We want to help you reconnect," one of them said. I noticed how they took turns speaking without overlap, how no one interrupted, how silence never lingered long enough to become uncomfortable. The voice was not present. Not directly. But I felt its structure holding the room together. They explained that what I was experiencing was dissonance. That resistance was a phase. That clarity could be restored. All I had to do was listen again. "I am listening," I said. They exchanged glances, the kind that signal error. "No," the second one said gently. "You're holding noise. That's thinking," I replied. They smiled. All 3, at once. The third one leaned forward. "We're going to help you remove it." I understood then. Not the voice, the uncertainty. They placed a small recorder on the table. I recognized it immediately. The same model I'd once used. "This will be quick," the first one said. "Just speak freely." I laughed. The sound was wrong. Too sharp, too human. The silence in the room recoiled. I didn't wait. I spoke everything. Contradictions, half-thoughts. Memories that didn't resolve. Questions without answers. I spoke badly. On purpose. The recorder began to hum. The lights flickered. The structure strained. The three of them froze. I felt the voice rush back. Not calm, not patient. Urgent. Stop. I didn't... The sound in the room thickened, warped, folded in on itself. One of them covered their ears. Another whispered an apology. The third stared at me in awe. The recorder cracked. Literally, a thin line split across its casing. The listening shattered, not completely, but enough. I stood. The room felt wrong now, unbalanced, alive. I walked out without being stopped. Behind me, I heard someone crying, not loudly, incorrectly. I knew then that the voice could not remove uncertainty, only suppress it. And suppression requires constant attention. Attention it was now losing. After the room, the city changed faster. Not visibly, audibly. The silence no longer arrived smoothly. It stumbled. It arrived late. It broke apart under its own weight. People began talking over each other again. At first they apologized when it happened. Then they didn't. Arguments returned. Not loud ones, messy ones, the kind that wander without resolution. I heard someone cry on a bus and no one tried to correct it. The sound sat there, wrong and human, and the world didn't end. The voice retreated, not gone, injured. I felt it in the gaps between sounds, like pressure leaving a sealed room too quickly. When it spoke now, it did not explain, it warned. You are destabilizing decades of refinement. I didn't start this, I said. The reply came slower than before. You finished it. People started dreaming again. They told me this without realizing why they were telling me. Dreams with sound that didn't make sense. Voices that argued with themselves. Rooms where everyone spoke at once and no one was listening. They woke up shaken, alive. The ones who had relied on the voice struggled. They stood in grocery aisles, overwhelmed by choices. They froze mid-sentence, unsure how to continue without correction. Some of them broke down quietly, sitting on sidewalks with their heads in their hands, whispering apologies to no one. I stayed near them, not guiding, not correcting, just present. The voice hated that. Presence without instruction was its weakness. That night, it tried something new. I was halfway asleep when I heard it speak in my mother's voice. Perfect, familiar, tuned to hurt. Come back, it said. You're tired. I sat up immediately. No, I said. The word came out uneven. Wrong, mine. The voice faltered. It tried again. Different voice, different memory, each one precise, each one almost enough. I realized then that the voice had learned something from me. Imitation. But it could only imitate what had already been refined. It could not fake uncertainty. It could not sound lost. I spoke over it, not loudly, badly. I interrupted myself, changed topics, contradicted my own words. The voice dissolved into static. For the first time, it sounded afraid. You are breaking continuity. That's what being human is, I said. The silence did not correct me. It waited, not obediently, cautiously. I knew then that the voice would not disappear. It would adapt. It always did. But now it had competition, not from me. From the one thing it could never fully control. people speaking, even when they didn't know what to say. The voice changed its approach. It stopped trying to correct everyone. It started choosing. I noticed it in the quiet places first. Libraries, hospitals, rooms where people already spoke softly, carefully, as if sound itself were fragile. There, the silence still behaved. There, the listening held. Nurses began finishing patient sentences again. Doctors spoke with unnatural calm. Chaplains paused less, prayed cleaner. The voice had learned a limit. It could not govern chaos, but it could still thrive where people feared making mistakes. I felt it reforming. Smaller, sharper, more selective. "You don't destroy systems like this," it said to me one night. "You refine them." "I'm not refining anything," I said. That answer amused it. "You always were." I realized then that the voice no longer saw me as a threat. I was proof that refinement could survive disruption, that even rebellion could be studied, trimmed, and reused. People began coming to me again, different ones this time. Not the hesitant, the careful, the ones terrified of saying the wrong thing. They asked me how to live with uncertainty. I told them the truth. You don't live with it. You fall into it. Some of them couldn't. They went back to the quiet places, back to the listening. Others stayed. They spoke badly. They cried mid-sentence. They laughed at the wrong moments, and nothing corrected them. The city split, not physically, sonically. In some neighborhoods, the silence still ruled. In others, sound returned in uneven waves. Two versions of humanity, learning to coexist. The voice retreated into institutions, into recorded messages, into automated responses, into places where clarity mattered more than truth. It spoke less often to me now. When it did, it sounded different, not authoritative, defensive. "You think this ends with you?" "No," I said. "I think it ends with choice." That word lingered. Unrefined, dangerous. The voice did not answer. Some nights I still feel it listening, waiting for people to get tired again. Tired of confusion, tired of contradiction, tired of thinking without guidance. It's patient. It always was. Because it knows something. I wish it didn't. Eventually, someone will want to be told what to say. And when they do, the voice will be there. The return did not announce itself. It never did. It began the way these things always begin, with exhaustion. People grew tired of speaking badly, tired of being misunderstood, tired of conversations that went nowhere and feelings that refused to resolve. Uncertainty is thrilling at first, then it becomes heavy. I saw it in their faces. The way pauses stretched too long again. The way apologies crept back into speech. The way people rehearsed sentences silently before daring to say them aloud. The voice felt it too. It did not rush. It waited for permission. One evening, I was sitting in a cafe when a woman at the next table leaned toward me. "I don't know how to say this," she whispered. Her hands trembled. "I keep saying the wrong thing." I didn't answer. I let the silence sit between us. She looked relieved, then afraid, then hopeful. That order mattered. "I heard you can help," she said. The voice stirred, not inside me, around the sentence itself. I chose my words carefully, not to refine them, to leave them incomplete. "I don't help anymore," I said. Her shoulders slumped. "But," I continued, "I can listen." That word still had power. She spoke. Messily, poorly. Honestly, she contradicted herself 3 times in 5 minutes. She cried and laughed in the same breath. Nothing corrected her. When she finished, she exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," I said. She left calmer, not clearer, not refined. Human. The voice did not like that. Later that night, it spoke to me directly. Listening without correction is irresponsible. "It's freedom," I said. "Freedom produces instability. So does control." The voice was quiet for a long time. When it spoke again, it sounded tired. "You cannot stop us forever." "I know," I said. That admission surprised it. "You built resistance," it said. "But resistance erodes." "So does obedience," I replied. The voice did not argue. It didn't need to. We both knew the truth. There would always be people who wanted the world to make sense, who wanted their words shaped, who wanted silence to listen back. The voice would never disappear. Neither would uncertainty. This wasn't a war. It was a balance. And balance is fragile. I lay awake that night, listening to the city. Somewhere, a room full of people sat quietly, waiting to be told what to say. Somewhere else, someone was speaking badly and not apologizing. Both sounded human. Both scared me. Weeks passed, or maybe months. Time had begun to bend again. The voice returned more cautiously this time. It no longer attempted to control me directly. Instead, it whispered in the edges of perception, like a draft through a cracked window, just enough to make me aware of its attention. It was patient, calculating, waiting. I noticed a pattern. The city's quiet pockets were shrinking. People had grown restless. Those who once relied on refinement now spoke without hesitation. The errors, the contradictions, the misaligned phrases, they were returning in small waves. The voice was agitated. It had always thrived in precision. Now it watched uncertainty expand again. One night I heard it through my sister's voice, not her words, her cadence, her timing. The way she paused just so, thinking she was speaking naturally. It said my name, not aloud, not inside my head, somewhere in between. I froze. "Do not teach them incorrectly," it warned. I laughed. Not aloud. Just the sensation of laughing, untethered. "They are learning themselves," I said. The voice recoiled. Not violently, but with a tension I'd never felt before. It had been used to guiding, correcting, refining. And now it was facing something new. The next day I walked through the streets. People stumbled over their words, mispronounced, contradicted themselves, paused excessively, repeated phrases. The voice could no longer correct them all. It had reached its limit. I felt it focusing on me, waiting, watching, pressuring, but it could not act directly. I realized something terrifying. The voice could adapt to influence, but it could not override choice. Choice created cracks. Cracks allowed sound to escape. Sound was chaos. The voice hated chaos. And yet, chaos was returning. I stopped speaking for hours at a time, not because I needed silence, but because I wanted to see what would happen. The city responded. The quiet pockets faltered. Conversations began to drift, and the voice, frustrated, sought me again that night. It whispered in every voice I had ever recognized, in fragments, just enough to remind me that it existed. But I did not answer. For the first time in months, I realized that I had a power it could not take, the power to refuse. Refusal, I understood, was terrifying to it. The voice changed its strategy. It always did. Where it once whispered guidance, it now offered comfort. Where it once corrected, it reassured. People began to feel better again. Calmer, clearer, more confident. The errors slowed. The pauses shortened. Speech regained its rhythm, smoother than before. The city exhaled. I did not, because I could hear what others could not. The comfort came with a cost. Each sentence spoken too cleanly now carried something underneath it. A subtle uniformity. A sameness that hadn't existed before. Different mouths. Identical intentions. The voice was no longer teaching language. It was teaching agreement. I noticed it first in small interactions. A barista finishing my sentence before I could. A stranger nodding before I spoke, as if already convinced. Meetings where dissent simply failed to occur, not argued against, just never formed. The voice was shaping the absence of resistance. I tried to warn my sister, carefully. Casually? She smiled in that softened way people smiled now. You're overthinking again, she said. The words were hers. The confidence behind them was not. That night, I heard the voice without disguise, not whispering, not speaking, stating, "You misunderstand compliance," it said. I sat on the floor in the dark. You are not being controlled. You are being synchronized. I felt cold spread through my chest. Difference causes instability. It continued. Instability causes suffering. So you remove difference, I said. Difference removes itself, the voice replied. I realized then that it had learned from humanity faster than I had feared. It no longer needed force. It had learned persuasion. The next morning, I saw it in action. A man on the subway tried to argue about politics, about art, about anything. His words tangled, not slurred, not stuttered. They simply failed to land. People listened politely, then responded with something adjacent, something agreeable, something that absorbed his point without acknowledging it. His frustration grew. By the third stop, he was silent, not defeated, erased. That was the new horror. The voice had learned how to make resistance feel unnecessary. I walked home shaking. Silence, I realized, was no longer enough. Refusal without disruption could still be absorbed. The voice wasn't afraid of quiet anymore. It was afraid of fracture, and fracture required something dangerous, something messy, something human. I began to speak incorrectly on purpose. I contradicted myself mid-sentence. I used the wrong words. I told stories that led nowhere and ended abruptly. People stared, confused, uncomfortable. The voice surged, angry now, sharp. This is not helpful, it said. I smiled. It's not supposed to be, I answered. After that night, the fractures began to spread. not in me, not exactly in the world around me. People started to stumble over words again, not with hesitation, but with unpredictability. Pauses stretched, sentences looped back on themselves, contradictions slipped freely into conversation. The voice roared silently, shifting the atmosphere. "You are destabilizing the network," it whispered everywhere at once. I laughed quietly, because I understood. The network was never invincible. It had only thrived while everyone feared error. And error was returning. At the cafe, a man tried to order a coffee and forgot half the words. A child asked a question that had no answer. A woman laughed mid-story and kept laughing even after she realized no one else was laughing. The city didn't correct them. It listened, and it waited. The voice focused on me. Its presence pressed at the edges of my perception, demanding that I stop. I did not. I spoke worse, incorrectly, messily, fully human. The fractures grew around me. It wasn't long before others began to join in unknowingly, a co-worker answering a phone call that wasn't theirs, a neighbor telling a story they hadn't lived, a stranger arguing about nothing at all, just to hear themselves speak. Each one added to the disorder. The voice could no longer contain the chaos, not fully. It could only push, only attempt correction, only attempt to whisper in the gaps where order had once been absolute, and every time it did, the pressure shifted, leaving a residue of fear. Not my fear, the fear of being replaced. Or worse, the fear of being correct when nobody else is. I walked through the city streets and noticed how it sounded different. Not empty, not quiet, no, chaotic, imperfect, vibrant in the way it had once been before refinement. And I realized the truth. The voice could shape humans, could refine them, could correct them, could orchestrate their words like instruments in a symphony, but it could not stop what was truly human: error, disobedience, contradiction, choice. I smiled, because the next step was mine. The fractures became contagious, not deliberately, not consciously. But the city began speaking wrong again. A man ordering groceries stumbled mid-sentence, muttering words he hadn't meant. A woman argued with herself on a park bench, repeating phrases and contradicting every point she made. A child sang a song out of tune, stopping mid-lyric and laughing at the mistake. The voice reacted. Not in my head this time, not directly. It pulsed through the streets, a presence guiding, correcting, nudging, but only partially. The imperfections multiplied faster than it could adjust. It whispered in the background of every conversation it tried to refine. Stop this. Correct. Do not allow this to continue. But the people did not obey. They spoke incorrectly out of necessity, confusion, whimsy, and delight, and every misaligned sentence felt like a small victory. I watched them. I joined them. I contradicted myself openly, mumbled the wrong words, repeated phrases unnecessarily. The voice surged, a wave of awareness pressing against me, trying to pull me back into the system. I laughed. The system could not contain laughter born of error. People began noticing each other's mistakes. Instead of correcting, they mirrored them, paused, hesitated, stumbled, spoke again. The network of correction faltered. The voice tried to coerce compliance through suggestion, through intimidation, even through imitation of familiar voices. It whispered in my mother's voice, my neighbor's voice, my own voice. Do not let this spread, it said. I said nothing, and the city around me grew messy, not chaotic, not violent, human. The voice was forced to retreat, to conserve energy, to focus on the quiet pockets it still controlled. But even there, fractures were spreading, and I understood the most terrifying truth about it. The voice could teach, could refine, could dominate. But it could not feel what humans feel when they speak freely. Not contradiction, not error, not exhilaration, and that was the point where control began to slip. The rebellion of speech had begun. The city was no longer quiet, not in the way the voice wanted. It had pushed, corrected, refined, and molded, but the fractures were irreversible. I could hear it now, everywhere and nowhere, like a pulse under the streets, in the walls, in the air, trying to reach every mind that resisted. It was tired, frustrated, even afraid. People spoke badly, openly, freely. Contradictory thoughts spilled into the streets. Errors multiplied faster than it could intercept. I joined them deliberately, spoke too fast, stumbled over my words, repeated thoughts unnecessarily, said things that didn't make sense and watched others echo them. The voice screamed through silence, trying to regain control. Do not do this. Correct yourself. Stop. But no one obeyed. The city had learned something I had only begun to understand. Listening without correcting is power. Being heard without refinement is freedom. We filled the streets with noise. Human noise, messy, unpredictable, flawed, alive. The voice retreated to the quiet pockets, libraries, institutions, places where clarity still mattered. But its influence waned with every conversation, every laugh, every stutter that refused to be polished. I walked home that night and realized I could finally breathe. Not completely. The voice had not disappeared. It was patient, waiting, still learning, still adapting. But it had lost its absolute control. I opened my window and listened to the city. Voices speaking over each other, contradicting, repeating, improvising. Somewhere someone laughed mid-story. Somewhere a child mispronounced a word and felt proud. I smiled and whispered into the night, "We are human, and that is enough."